The morning light of 3 suns filtered through the crystal dome of Altarian University as students from across the galaxy hurried to their classes. The air buzzed with dozens of different languages being translated through universal communicators that hung around necks or were embedded in various body parts depending on the species. Jinwoo Park walked among them, his modified appearance allowing him to blend in with the crowd of alien beings that filled the wide corridors. He had been doing this for 30 years now, attending lectures whenever his work schedule allowed. The data analysis job at the orbital mining station paid well enough and asked few questions about his background, which suited him perfectly. His colleagues knew him as Jin, a quiet Centaurian who kept to himself and had an unusual interest in ancient civilizations. The synthetic skin patches on his face and the biomechanical implants along his arms made him look like any other modified being in this part of the galaxy. Today was different, though. Today, Professor Thexvar was giving his famous lecture on extinct species, and Jinwoo knew that humans would be discussed. He had been avoiding this particular lecture for years, but something inside him needed to hear what they said about his people. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was the need to know how history remembered them. The lecture hall was enormous, built to accommodate beings of all sizes and environmental needs. The Cathara students clustered together in the lower sections, their insect-like bodies requiring special seating arrangements. Above them, the gaseous nebulans floated in their environmental suits, their forms shifting and glowing softly. The reptilian Sauroch preferred the warmer sections near the thermal vents, while various other species filled the remaining spaces. Jinwoo chose a seat in the middle section, neither too close nor too far from the front. He activated his personal translator and checked that his disguise was holding properly. The synthetic skin felt tight against his real flesh underneath, but after 3 decades of practice, he barely noticed the discomfort anymore. Professor Thexvar entered the hall, with the confident stride of someone who had given thousands of lectures. His crystalline skin caught the light from the dome above, creating rainbow patterns that shifted as he moved. Multiple optical sensors dotted his elongated head, each one capable of focusing independently. He was considered one of the galaxy's leading experts on xenobiology, and his research on extinct species was required reading at most universities. The professor activated the holographic display system, and immediately the air above the students filled with images of long-dead worlds and vanished civilizations. His voice, translated perfectly into each student's native language, filled the vast space with academic authority. "Welcome to another exploration of the galaxy's lost children," Professor Thexvar began, his multiple eyes scanning the crowd. "Today we examine species that once showed promise but failed to adapt to the changing cosmos. Evolution is merciless, and intelligence alone is never enough for survival." The first few extinct species were ones Jinwoo had never heard of, ancient civilizations that had destroyed themselves through war or environmental collapse, millions of years before humans had even learned to make fire. The professor discussed each one with clinical detachment, reducing entire civilizations to data points and evolutionary failures. Then, the holographic display changed, and Jinwoo's breath caught in his throat. The image of Earth appeared, blue and beautiful as it had been in his childhood. The professor's voice continued without any change in tone, as if discussing just another failed experiment of nature. "The humans of Earth present a particularly interesting case study," Professor Thexvar said, zooming the display to show various human cities. "A species that emerged roughly 200,000 years ago and managed to develop space travel and basic quantum communication before their inevitable self-destruction." Jinwoo watched as images of his homeworld rotated slowly in the air above him. New Seoul appeared, the city where he had grown up, now displayed as nothing more than an archaeological curiosity. The professor showed human faces, human art, human technology, all labeled and categorized like museum pieces. "Note the bipedal structure and the limited sensory organs," the professor continued, highlighting human anatomy with laser pointers. "Only 2 optical sensors, a primitive olfactory system, and audio receptors that could only process a narrow range of frequencies. Despite these limitations, they showed remarkable creativity and what they called emotional intelligence." A Cathara student in the front section raised one of her multiple arms. Professor Thexvar acknowledged her with a nod of his crystalline head. "Professor, What made them interesting enough to study if they were so primitive? The student asked through her translator. An excellent question, the professor replied, bringing up new displays showing human behavior patterns. Despite their obvious physical and sensory limitations, humans displayed several unusual characteristics that made them valuable subjects for research. They possessed an irrational tendency toward what they called hope, even in situations where mathematical analysis proved their efforts were futile. The professor showed footage of human soldiers defending evacuation ships during what Jinwoo knew were the final days of Earth. The scenes were ones he remembered living through, but seeing them presented as academic data felt like watching his own funeral. Observe this behavior pattern, Professor Thexavar said, slowing down the footage. These human soldiers continue fighting despite knowing they cannot win. They sacrifice themselves to buy time for others to escape, even though the overall tactical situation remains hopeless. This illogical emotional response was one of their most fascinating traits. Another student, this one a Sauroch with cybernetic implants along his skull, spoke up. Did they not understand basic probability calculations? They understood perfectly, the professor answered. That's what made them so intriguing. They could analyze a situation logically and still choose to act against their own survival instincts if they believed it might help others. This emotional override of logical thinking was unique among studied species. Jinwoo forced himself to remain still as he watched his people being dissected like insects under a microscope. Every gesture, every cultural practice, every aspect of human civilization was reduced to cold data points and evolutionary quirks. The professor continued his lecture, showing examples of human art and music. Their creative expressions often focused on themes of loss, love, and mortality. Unlike species that achieved true quantum consciousness, humans remained trapped in linear thinking patterns that led them to obsess over individual mortality and interpersonal relationships. A nebular student's translated voice drifted down from above. What caused their extinction? Multiple factors, Professor Thexavar replied, bringing up timeline displays. Climate change, resource depletion, and ultimately warfare with more advanced species who required their planet's resources. The humans attempted to resist, which only accelerated their demise. Had they accepted integration into galactic society, peacefully, some might have survived in research facilities. Jinwoo's hands clenched beneath his desk. Integration into galactic society meant slavery and experimentation, as he knew all too well. The professor made it sound like the humans had been given a choice, when in reality, they had been hunted down systematically. The final human settlements were eliminated approximately 200 years ago, the professor concluded. Though some specimens were preserved for study until fairly recently, the species is now completely extinct. Their genetic material remains in our databases for future reference, but no living humans exist anywhere in the known galaxy. As the professor moved on to discuss other extinct species, Jinwoo sat in stunned silence. Around him, students took notes and asked questions about beings who had once lived and loved and dreamed, now reduced to footnotes in xenobiology textbooks. He realized that in the eyes of galactic academia, he was already dead, had been dead, for decades. The weight of being the last witness to his species' true story pressed down on him like the gravity of a dying star. The lecture continued as Professor Thexavar brought up more detailed analysis of human society and behavior. Jinwoo watched from his seat as holographic displays showed human families, children playing in parks, and people celebrating festivals that he remembered from his own childhood. Every image felt like a knife turning in his chest, but he forced himself to keep watching. The human family structure was particularly primitive, the professor explained, showing images of parents with their children. Unlike more advanced species that practice communal breeding and child-rearing, humans formed pair bonds and raised offspring in small units. This created inefficient resource allocation and emotional instability when family units were separated. A tall student with blue-tinted skin and gill slits along her neck raised her hand. Professor, did humans have any redeeming qualities that might have made them valuable if they had survived? Professor Thexavar's optical sensors focused on several points as he considered the question. They possessed certain characteristics that made them excellent subjects for psychological research. Their capacity for self-sacrifice was mathematically impossible to predict, which made them useful for testing extreme stress responses. They also showed remarkable adaptability when placed in controlled environments. The professor activated a new set of displays showing what looked like laboratory footage. Jinwoo's blood turned cold as he recognized the sterile white rooms and observation windows. These were images from the research facilities where captured humans had been taken during the final years of the war. The Human Specimen Project provided invaluable data on stress tolerance and behavioral modification. Professor Thexvar continued with the same academic tone he used for everything else. We were able to observe how humans responded to various psychological pressures and isolation techniques. The results helped us understand the breaking points of emotional species. Jinwoo gripped the edges of his desk so hard that his knuckles went white beneath his synthetic skin. He remembered those facilities, remembered being dragged through corridors filled with the screams of his people. He had been lucky enough to escape during a prisoner transport accident, but many others had not been so fortunate. One particularly interesting case was specimen H7742, the professor said, bringing up detailed charts and brain scans. This subject was a young human female who demonstrated exceptional resistance to psychological pressure. We subjected her to various scenarios designed to break human spirit, but she maintained what they called hope for over 2 years. The room began to spin around Jinwoo as he stared at the brain scans on the holographic display. Those patterns, those neural pathways, he recognized them because he had seen them before in medical files. H7742 was his sister Suyung. The professor was talking about his sister like she was a laboratory rat. The subject's emotional responses were fascinating, Professor Thexvar continued, apparently unaware of the emotional devastation he was causing one of his students. Even when presented with mathematical proof that escape was impossible and rescue would never come, H7742 continued to believe that someone would save her. This irrational optimism persisted until the very end of the testing period. A Cathara student clicked her mandibles together in what Jinwoo had learned was their equivalent of raising a hand. What happened to this specimen after the testing was complete? The facility was evacuated when human resistance forces mounted an attack on the installation, the professor replied matter-of-factly. All specimens were disposed of according to standard protocols before the evacuation. The research data was preserved, but the biological materials were deemed too dangerous to transport. Disposed of. That was how they described the murder of his sister and countless other humans. Disposed of like garbage, like broken equipment that was no longer useful. Jinwoo felt something breaking inside his chest, a pain that went deeper than anything physical. The professor moved on to discuss human reproduction and child development, showing images of human babies and describing their extended childhood as an evolutionary weakness. He talked about human pair bonding as a primitive instinct that led to territorial behavior and resource conflicts. Every aspect of human nature was analyzed and dissected with cold scientific detachment. Their educational systems were particularly inefficient, Professor Thexvar noted, showing footage of human schools and universities. Instead of direct knowledge transfer through neural implants or quantum consciousness sharing, humans relied on verbal communication and written symbols. This led to massive information loss between generations and slow technological development. During the lecture break, students began to move around and discuss what they had learned. Jinwoo remained in his seat, staring at the space where his sister's brain scans had been displayed just minutes before. He felt completely numb, as if his body had forgotten how to feel anything at all. A voice beside him broke through his daze. "Excuse me? Are you feeling well?" Jinwoo looked up to see a Cathara student standing next to his desk. Her compound eyes were focused on his face with what seemed like concern. She was smaller than most of her species, with delicate features and intricate patterns on her chitinous skin. "I am fine," Jinwoo replied through his translator, though his voice sounded strange even to himself. "You seem distressed by the lecture." "Content," the Cathara continued. "I am Mira, and I study extinct civilizations for my research thesis. I notice you attend many lectures about vanished species. Are you also a researcher?" Something about her tone made Jinwoo look more carefully at her face. Despite the alien features, there was something familiar in the way she carried herself, something that reminded him of human body language. "I work in data analysis," Jinwoo answered carefully. I find these lectures interesting from a historical perspective. Historical perspective, Mira repeated, and there was something odd about the way she emphasized those words. Yes, it is important to remember history accurately. Sometimes official records do not tell the complete story. Before Jinwoo could respond, another voice joined their conversation. The professor's research methods are quite thorough, said a Sauroch student who had approached from across the room. His cybernetic implants glowed softly as he spoke. Though I sometimes wonder about the reliability of data collected under such controlled conditions. The Sauroch was tall even by his species standards, with dark scales and intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. His cybernetic modifications were more extensive than most, covering nearly half of his skull and extending down his neck. I am Do-hyun, the Sauroch said, introducing himself. I study engineering applications of biological systems. The human specimens provide interesting data about stress tolerance in organic structures. There was something about the way he said human specimens that made Jinwoo's translator hiccup slightly, as if the words were not quite right in their original language. Both Mira and Do-hyun seemed to be studying Jinwoo's reaction to their words very carefully. Professor Thexvar called for attention as the break ended, and students began returning to their seats. As Mira and Do-hyun moved away, Jinwoo caught Mira looking back at him with an expression that was difficult to read through her compound eyes. The second half of the lecture focused on what Professor Thexvar called human cultural artifacts. He showed examples of human music, literature, and art, explaining each one as evidence of their primitive emotional development. When he played a recording of human singing, several students made sounds of curiosity or amusement. Note the irregular patterns and emotional modulation, the professor explained as a human voice filled the lecture hall. Unlike the mathematical precision of Altarian tonal communication or the quantum harmonics of nebular song consciousness, human music was based entirely on subjective emotional response. They created sounds not to convey information efficiently, but to trigger feelings in other humans. Jinwoo recognized the song. It was an old Korean folk tune that his mother used to sing to him and his sister when they were children. Hearing it played as an example of primitive communication made his throat tighten with suppressed emotion. The lecture ended with Professor Thexvar summarizing the key points about human extinction. The humans serve as an excellent example of how emotional intelligence without corresponding technological advancement leads to evolutionary dead ends. Their inability to separate logic from feeling made them unsuitable for integration into galactic civilization. While their sacrifice behaviors provided valuable research data, their extinction was ultimately inevitable. As students began filing out of the lecture hall, Jinwoo remained in his seat until most of the crowd had dispersed. He needed time to process what he had heard, to figure out how to continue living with the knowledge that his sister had died in agony, while scientists took notes on her suffering. When he finally stood to leave, he found Mira and Do-hyun waiting, near the exit. They approached him together, and there was something in their posture that suggested they had been discussing him during his moment of contemplation. Jin, Mira said, using the shortened name he went by at the university. Would you be interested in continuing this discussion over refreshments? Jinwoo followed Mira and Do-hyun to a quiet section of the university's food court, where beings from different species gathered around tables designed to accommodate various physical needs. The area buzzed with conversations in dozens of languages, creating a perfect cover for private discussion. They chose a corner table away from the main crowd, where the ambient noise would mask their words from casual listeners. Mira ordered a nutrient solution through her environmental suit's feeding tube, while Do-hyun selected something that looked like raw meat but smelled like flowers. Jinwoo chose a simple energy drink that his modified digestive system could process without revealing his true biology. So, Mira began after they had settled at their table. What did you think of the professor's analysis of human extinction patterns? Jinwoo studied both of them carefully before answering. There was something in their manner that suggested this was not just academic curiosity. Both Mira and Do-hyun watched his face with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. The professor seemed very certain about his conclusions, Jinwoo replied cautiously, though I wonder how complete his data really is. Do-hyun's cybernetic implants flickered slightly as he leaned forward. What makes you question the completeness of his research? 200 years is not very long in galactic terms, Jinwoo said, choosing his words carefully. Species have been known to survive in hidden populations for much longer periods. Complete extinction verification requires checking every possible refuge in the galaxy. Mira's compound eyes focused on him with sharp attention. That is a very specific concern. Most students accept official extinction declarations without question. I work with data analysis, Jinwoo reminded them. I know how easy it is to miss information if you are not looking in the right places or asking the right questions. The three of them sat in silence for a moment, each seemingly weighing what to say next. Around them, other students discussed assignments and social plans, but their table felt like an island of tension in the busy food court. Jin, Do-Yun said finally, how long have you been attending Professor Thexvar's lectures? Several years, Jinwoo answered. I find extinct species research fascinating from a data preservation perspective. But you have never attended his lecture on humans before today, Mira observed. I have been tracking attendance patterns for my own research, and this was your first time hearing about human extinction. Jinwoo felt a chill run down his spine. If Mira had been monitoring who attended which lectures, she might have been watching him specifically. He wondered what else she might have noticed about his behavior or interests. I was not ready to hear about humans before today, he said, deciding that some version of the truth might be safer than continued lies. Not ready, Do-Hyun repeated. That is an interesting phrase. Why would someone need to be ready to hear academic information about an extinct species? Jinwoo realized he was walking into dangerous territory, but something about these two students made him want to continue the conversation. Maybe it was the way they asked questions that suggested they already knew some of the answers, or maybe it was just his desperate need to talk to someone about what he had experienced. Sometimes learning about loss takes emotional preparation, Jinwoo said. Even academic loss. Mira set down her nutrient tube and leaned back in her chair. You speak about humans as if you knew them personally. The statement hung in the air between them like a challenge. Jinwoo felt his heart rate increasing, but forced himself to remain calm. His disguise had held for 30 years, and he could not afford to let it fail now because of emotional reactions. I have studied many extinct species, he replied. After a while, you begin to feel connected to the lives that were lost. It becomes personal, even when it was never meant to be. Do-Yun's cybernetic implants pulsed more rapidly, and Jinwoo wondered if they were recording their conversation or analyzing his biometric responses. Many species use technology to detect lies or stress patterns during social interactions. That is a very human way of thinking, Do-Yun said quietly. The words hit Jinwoo like a physical blow. He stared at the Sorok student, trying to determine if the comment was innocent observation or deliberate provocation. Do-Hyun's reptilian features made his expressions difficult to read, but his eyes held an intelligence that seemed to see right, through Jinwoo's carefully maintained disguise. Emotional attachment to academic subjects is not unique to any single species, Jinwoo said, but his voice sounded strained even through the universal translator. No, Mira agreed, but the specific pattern of empathy you display matches documented human psychological profiles very closely. Jinwoo stood abruptly, knocking over his energy drink in the process. The purple liquid spread across the table surface, but none of them moved to clean it up. I think I should go. I have work to complete before my shift begins. Sit down, Jin, Do-Hyun said, and there was something in his tone that was both gentle and commanding. We are not your enemies. Against his better judgment, Jinwoo slowly lowered himself back into his chair. The leaked energy drink continued to drip onto the floor, creating a small puddle that reflected the artificial lights above. What do you want from me? Jinwoo asked, abandoning his attempts to seem casual. Mira looked around the food court to make sure no one was paying attention to their table, then leaned forward and spoke in a voice so low that their translators had to strain to pick up her words. We want to know why you reacted so strongly when Professor Thexvar discussed specimen H7742. Jinwoo felt the world tilt around him. He had thought he was hiding his reactions, but apparently his emotional responses had been more obvious than he realized. These two had been watching him specifically, waiting for him to reveal something about himself. I did not react to anything, he said, but the words sounded weak even to himself. Your biometric readings spiked when the professor showed the brain. Scans, Do-Yun said matter-of-factly. Your hands clenched, your breathing changed, and your skin temperature rose by 3 degrees. Those are classic grief responses. Many people find discussions of scientific torture disturbing, Jinwoo replied desperately. It does not mean anything personal. But you knew who H7742 was before the professor explained, Mira said. Your reaction began the moment the identification code appeared on the display before any details were given. Jinwoo stared at both of them, realizing that he had been caught in a trap that had probably been months in the making. They had been studying him, learning his patterns, waiting for exactly this moment when his emotional control would fail. Who are you? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Instead of answering directly, Mira reached up and touched something behind her ear. The air around her head shimmered for a moment, and suddenly her compound eyes were gone. In their place were brown human eyes, set in a face that was unmistakably Asian, despite the small scars where surgical modifications had been removed. My name is Dr. Mira Sato, she said in a voice that no longer needed translation. I am a xenobiologist, and I have been hiding among the Kythera for 15 years. Jinwoo's mouth fell open as he stared at the human face that had been concealed beneath alien features. Before he could process this revelation fully, Do-Yun also reached for controls hidden in his cybernetic implants. The reptilian appearance faded away like a holographic projection being turned off, revealing the face of a Korean man with kind eyes and familiar features. My name is Park Do-Yun, he said, and his voice carried the same accent that Jinwoo remembered from his childhood in New Seoul. And I think I am your cousin. The food court continued its normal bustle around them, but Jinwoo felt as if time had stopped completely. He stared at the face of a man he had thought was dead for 30 years, a cousin who had been 12 years old the last time Jinwoo saw him running through the streets as evacuation alarms wailed across the city. Do-Yun, Jinwoo whispered, and the name felt strange on his tongue after so many years of speaking only through translators. Hello, cousin, Do-Yun replied with a sad smile. We have been looking for you for a very long time. Jinwoo looked back and forth between the two human faces, staring at him with expressions of hope and relief. His mind struggled to process the reality that he was not alone, that other humans had survived and found ways to hide among the stars. How many? He asked, his voice cracking with emotion he could no longer suppress. More than you might think, Mira answered. Fewer than we need. Around them, alien students continued their normal conversations, completely unaware that 3 supposedly extinct humans were having a reunion in the middle of the university food court. The irony was not lost on any of them that they were surrounded by species that had participated in hunting down their people, while those same species remained completely oblivious to their presence. The 3 humans sat in stunned silence for several minutes, each processing the magnitude of what had just been revealed. Jinwoo kept staring at his cousin's face, trying to reconcile the 12-year-old boy he remembered with the grown man, sitting across from him. 30 years of separation felt both like a lifetime and like no time at all. We should not talk here, Mira said finally, glancing around at the other students in the food court. Too many sensitive ears and recording devices. Do-Hyun nodded and began reactivating his disguise. The familiar reptilian features reformed around his human face like a complex holographic mask. My apartment is secure. We can talk freely there. Mira also restored her Kythera appearance, the compound eyes and chitinous features sliding back into place with practiced ease. Only Jinwoo remained in his modified Centaurian form, though now it felt strange to maintain the disguise in front of people who knew the truth. They left the university together, walking through the crowded transit stations and residential districts, like any other group of alien students. No one gave them a second glance as they boarded the magnetic transport that would take them to Do-Yun's apartment complex in the outer residential ring. During the journey, they maintained casual conversation about academic topics, but Jinwoo could feel the weight of unspoken questions hanging between them. How had Do-Hyun survived? How many other humans were out there? What had happened to their families, their friends, their entire civilization in the years since the final evacuation? Do-hyun's apartment was small but comfortable, designed for a single Sarok resident with appropriate heating and humidity controls. The moment the door sealed behind them, all three humans deactivated their disguises and stood facing each other in their true forms. "I cannot believe you are alive," Jinwoo said, reaching out to touch his cousin's shoulder as if to confirm he was real. "I saw the evacuation ships leaving New Seoul. I thought everyone from our district was killed in the bombing." "I was on one of the last ships out," Do-hyun replied. "But it was shot down before we could reach the jump point. Most of the passengers died in the crash, but a few of us survived. We were captured and taken to research facilities." "Like Soo-young," Jinwoo said quietly. Do-hyun's expression grew dark. "Yes, like your sister. I was in the same facility as H7742 for several months before they separated us. She never stopped asking about you. Never stopped believing you would come for her." Jinwoo closed his eyes against the pain of that revelation. "I tried to find her. I searched for years, but the facilities were always moving, always changing locations. By the time I tracked down where she had been taken, the records said all the specimens had been disposed of." "Disposed of," Mira repeated with bitter anger. "Such a clean word for mass murder." "How did you escape?" Jinwoo asked his cousin. "There was an attack on the facility by human resistance fighters," Do-hyun explained. "They could not save everyone, but they got some of us out. The resistance had developed these disguise technologies, ways to make us look like other species. They gave me this Saurok identity and told me to disappear into the general population." "What happened to the resistance?" "Most of them died fighting," Do-hyun said sadly. "A few survived and went into deep cover like us. We lost contact with each other over the years. It was safer that way." Mira had been listening quietly, but now she spoke up. "I was never part of the resistance. I was a graduate student doing research on alien biology when Earth was attacked. I managed to escape during the evacuation and found refuge with a group of Kithara researchers who thought I was a newly discovered subspecies." "How long have you been looking for other survivors?" Jinwoo asked. "About 10 years, Mira replied. "I started by monitoring university attendance records, looking for students who showed unusual interest in human-related research or who displayed behavioral patterns that might indicate hidden human psychology. That is how you found me," Jinwoo realized. "You were not easy to spot," Do-hyun said with a slight smile. "Your disguise is very good, and you were careful about your behavior patterns. But Mira noticed that you avoided the human extinction lectures until today, and that you always attended alone rather than forming study groups like most species prefer. Isolation behavior is common among traumatized survivors," Mira added. "I recognized it because I display the same patterns myself." Jinwoo walked to the apartment's small window and looked out at the alien city beyond. Thousands of beings from dozens of species moved through the streets below, living their lives in a galaxy where humans were supposedly extinct. "How many of us are left?" he asked without turning around. "We do not know exactly," Do-hyun answered. "Mira and I have identified 11 definite survivors over the past 3 years. We suspect there are others, but confirming identity without blowing our covers is extremely difficult." 11, Jinwoo repeated. "Out of billions." 11 that we know of, Mira corrected. "There could be more in other sectors of the galaxy, other survivors who escaped to different regions and never made contact." Jinwoo turned back to face them. "What is the plan? Do we just keep hiding forever?" "We have been debating that question for years," Do-hyun said. "Some of the survivors we have contacted want to remain hidden permanently. They have built new lives. Some even have families with other species. They do not want to risk exposure. But others think we have a responsibility to preserve human knowledge and culture," Mira added. "We are the last witnesses to what humanity really was, not the distorted version that scientists like Professor Thexavar present to the galaxy." "Today's lecture was particularly painful," Jinwoo said. "Hearing him describe Soo-young like she was just another lab specimen, talking about human emotions and culture like they were curiosities to be studied. That is exactly why we need to act," Mira said with growing intensity. Every year that passes, the true story of humanity gets more distorted. The official records focus only on our supposed primitiveness and the research data from torture facilities. They ignore our art, our philosophy, our actual achievements. "What do you propose we do?" Jinwoo asked. "Reveal ourselves? Tell the galaxy that humans are not extinct?" "Maybe," Do-hyun said, "but if we do that, we need to be prepared for the consequences. Some species will want to capture us for study, others will want to finish what they started. And the galactic government will want to control the narrative about what happened during the human wars." "We would need proof," Mira said. "Documentation that we are real, that we have been living among them for decades without being detected. We would need to show the galaxy that their assumptions about human capabilities were completely wrong." "Professor, Thexavar's lecture is broadcast to universities across the galaxy," Do-hyun noted. "If we were to reveal ourselves during one of his presentations, the impact would be enormous." Jinwoo felt a cold certainty settling in his chest. "You want to interrupt tomorrow's lecture?" "Tomorrow he is giving his advanced seminar on human psychological research," Mira explained. "He will be showing footage from the research facilities, discussing specific specimens in detail. It will be broadcast live to the Galactic Academic Network, including more information about H7742, Do-hyun added gently. Jinwoo closed his eyes and thought about his sister, about her voice calling his name as he was dragged away from the research facility 30 years ago. He thought about all the other humans who had died in those sterile white rooms, while scientists took notes on their suffering. He thought about the 11 survivors scattered across the galaxy, hiding their true nature from species that believed they were extinct. "If we do this," he said finally, "there is no going back. Our lives as we know them will be over." "Our lives as we know them are already over," Mira replied. "We are living as ghosts of a dead species, pretending to be something we are not. Maybe it is time for the galaxy to learn that reports of our extinction were greatly exaggerated." Do-hyun stood and walked to a storage cabinet in the corner of his apartment. He returned with a small device that looked like a standard university recording unit, but with several modifications that made it clearly non-standard equipment. "This can override the lecture hall's transmission system," he explained. "If we decide to go through with this, we can broadcast our revelation directly to every university in the galaxy." Jinwoo stared at the device, understanding that it represented a point of no return. Once they used it, every surviving human in the galaxy would be at risk. But continuing to hide meant that the truth about their people would die with them. "We need to vote," he said. "All 3 of us have to agree, or we do not do this." They looked at each other. 3 survivors of a supposedly extinct species preparing to make a decision that would change everything. The next morning arrived with the same 3 suns rising over Altarian University. But everything felt different to Jinwoo as he walked through the familiar corridors. Students hurried past him carrying their usual academic materials, completely unaware that this day would change everything they thought they knew about galactic history. Mira and Do-hyun had voted yes the previous evening, and after hours of discussion, Jinwoo had joined them. They had spent the night preparing, checking their equipment, and rehearsing what they would say when the moment came. Now, walking toward Professor Thexavar's advanced seminar, Jinwoo felt like he was moving toward his own execution. The seminar room was smaller than the main lecture hall, designed for graduate students and advanced researchers. Only about 50 beings were present, but the broadcast equipment indicated that thousands more would be watching from universities across the galaxy. The intimate setting somehow made what they were about to do feel even more dangerous. Professor Thexavar entered with his usual confident manner, but today he carried additional data storage devices and what looked like classified research materials. His multiple optical sensors swept the room as he settled behind his presentation podium. "Today we will examine the more detailed aspects of human psychological research," the professor announced. "Some of the material we will discuss contains graphic documentation of experimental procedures, so I want to warn sensitive students that they may find certain content disturbing." Jinwoo took his usual seat in the middle section, while Mira positioned herself near the front, and Do-hyun sat close to the technical equipment at the back of the room. They had agreed on their timing, but now that the moment was approaching, Jinwoo felt his resolve wavering. The professor began by reviewing basic human anatomy and psychology, then moved into more detailed discussion of the research facilities. The Human Specimen Project collected over 3,000 subjects during its operational period, Professor Thexvar explained. This provided an unprecedented opportunity to study human behavior under controlled conditions. The holographic displays filled with images that made Jinwoo's stomach turn. Laboratory rooms, observation equipment, and worst of all, footage of actual humans being subjected to various tests and procedures. Every face in the recordings belonged to someone who had once lived and loved and hoped, now reduced to scientific data. Specimen H7742 was among our most valuable subjects, the professor continued, bringing up the detailed files that Jinwoo recognized from yesterday's lecture. This young female demonstrated remarkable psychological resilience, maintaining hope and emotional stability far longer than theoretical models predicted. The display showed more of Soo-young's brain scans, along with detailed notes about her responses to various psychological pressures. Jinwoo watched footage of his sister, sitting in a sterile white room, talking to researchers who were analyzing every word she spoke. Note how the subject continues to ask about family members who are clearly deceased, Professor Thexvar commented as they watched Soo-young asking about her brother's location. This denial of obvious reality was consistent across multiple human specimens, suggesting that their emotional attachments override logical analysis even in extreme circumstances. Jinwoo's hands began to shake as he watched his sister's final days being discussed like an academic exercise. She looked thin and tired in the recordings, but her eyes still held the determination he remembered from their childhood. The subject's most interesting response came when we introduced false hope scenarios, the professor continued. We would provide fabricated evidence that rescue was possible, then document how this affected her psychological state. Even when she logically understood that the scenarios were fictional, her emotional responses suggested genuine belief in potential salvation. Professor, a student interrupted, what was the purpose of these false hope experiments? We wanted to understand how human irrationality functioned at a neurological level, Professor Thexvar replied. If we could identify the brain structures responsible for hope and emotional resilience, we could potentially modify those responses in other species or develop more effective psychological control methods. That was the moment Jinwoo stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. Every being in the room turned to look at him, and he saw Do-hyun's hand move toward the transmission override device. Professor, Jinwoo said, his voice carrying clearly through the room's translation system, I have a question about your research methodology. Of course, Professor Thexvar replied, his optical sensors focusing on Jinwoo. What is your question? How can you be certain that specimen H7742's hope was irrational? Jinwoo asked, taking a step closer to the front of the room. What if her belief in rescue was based on accurate assessment of her family relationships rather than denial of reality? The professor's crystalline features shifted slightly, suggesting confusion. I do not understand your question. The subject's family members were confirmed deceased. Her hope for rescue was mathematically impossible. But what if you were wrong about her family? Jinwoo continued, moving further down the aisle. What if someone who loved her really was coming to find her? That is a meaningless hypothetical, Professor Thexvar said dismissively. We had complete documentation of all family members' fate. No, Jinwoo said, reaching the front of the room. You had incomplete data. He reached up and deactivated his disguise controls. The synthetic skin patches faded away, the biomechanical implants powered down, and for the first time in 30 years, Jinwoo Park stood in public as a human being. The room erupted in gasps, clicks, and various other expressions of shock from different species. Professor Thexvar's multiple eyes focused and refocused rapidly as if trying to process what he was seeing. Specimen H7742's hope was not irrational, Jinwoo said, his voice now clear and unfiltered by translation systems. She was right to believe that her brother would come for her. I did come, I just arrived too late. This is impossible, Professor Thexvar whispered, backing away from his podium. Humans are extinct. The biological scans, the genetic verification systems are inadequate, Mira said, standing and revealing her own human features. We learned to hide better than you learned to hunt. Do-hyun activated the transmission override, ensuring that their revelation was being broadcast live to universities across the galaxy. "My name is Park Do-hyun," he announced, dropping his reptilian disguise. "I was a survivor of Research Facility Designation X7, where I was held as specimen H8834. Professor Thexvar looked frantically between the three humans now standing openly in his classroom. His academic certainty had completely crumbled, replaced by something that looked like panic. "How many?" he asked weakly. "More than you killed," Jinwoo replied. "Fewer than you tried to destroy." The transmission was carrying their words to every corner of the galaxy. On thousands of worlds, beings who had accepted the official story of human extinction were watching three supposedly dead humans speak, directly to them. "For 30 years we have lived among you," Mira said, addressing not just the room but the entire galactic academic community. "We have worked beside you, learned from you, and in some cases, even formed friendships with you. We are not the primitive, emotional creatures described in your textbooks. We adapted," Do-hyun added. "We survived. We integrated into your society so completely that you never suspected we were there. Your own experts on human psychology failed to recognize actual humans sitting in their classrooms." Jinwoo looked directly into the main recording device, knowing that his words would reach species that had participated in hunting down his people. "My sister Soo-young died believing that love was stronger than logic, that hope was more powerful than mathematics. You called this irrational, but she was right. Her love and hope kept me searching for 30 years. Her belief in rescue inspired me to never give up. You studied us like insects," Mira continued. "But you missed the most important thing about humanity. We do not survive because we are stronger or smarter than other species. We survive because we refuse to accept that survival is impossible." Professor Thexvar had collapsed into his chair, staring at the three humans as if they were ghosts. Around the room, students sat in stunned silence, their academic worldview completely shattered. "The age of hiding is over," Do-hyun announced. "Humanity is not extinct. We have been here all along, watching, learning, and remembering. The galaxy will need to revise its textbooks." As galactic security forces began converging on the university, the three humans stood together in front of the broadcasting equipment. They had revealed themselves to the entire galaxy, and there was no going back. But for the first time in 30 years, Jinwoo felt like his sister's hope had finally been justified. Across the galaxy, other humans in hiding watched the broadcast and made their own decisions about whether to step out of the shadows. The carefully maintained lie of human extinction was crumbling, and the galaxy would never be the same. In his final academic log entry, Professor Thexvar would write that his life's work required complete revision, and that perhaps it was time for the hunters to become students instead.